The first gunshot echoed through Marfa, Texas. Just as Penelope Greene stepped off the dusty stagecoach, her 6-month-old daughter Lily wailing against her shoulder, a harsh welcome to their new beginning in the summer of 1879. Penelope clutched her baby tighter, her heart pounding as people scattered from the main street, diving for cover as more shots rang out from the saloon. This wasn't the fresh start she had imagined when she'd left Philadelphia with her meager savings and a desperate hope following her husband's death. "Get down, madam," a deep voice commanded as strong hands suddenly pulled her and her child behind a water trough. Penelope found herself face to face with the most striking blue eyes she'd ever seen, set in a sun-weathered face beneath a worn leather hat. "Town's usually more welcoming than this," he offered with a grim smile, checking his revolver. "Who are you?" Penelope managed, trying to quiet Lily, whose cries grew louder with each gunshot. "Griffin Jackson, madam, town's deputy." He tipped his hat slightly, eyes darting toward the saloon. "You picked a mighty unfortunate time to arrive in Marfa." The shootout lasted only minutes, but to Penelope it felt like hours as she huddled behind the trough, one hand supporting Lily, the other gripping the stranger's arm. When silence finally settled, Deputy Jackson helped her to her feet. "I apologize for your reception, Miss Greene." "Penelope Greene." She straightened her travel-worn dress. "And this is Lily." Griffin Jackson's expression softened as he looked at the baby. "Well, Miss Greene, let me help you with your belongings. Where were you planning to stay?" Penelope's confidence faltered. I have a letter." "My cousin Sarah wrote that the boarding house might have a room." Griffin nodded, his expression troubled. "Mrs. Wilson's place, it's decent enough, but—" He hesitated. "Truth be told, Marfa's been struggling. Droughts hit us hard and the railroad company changed their plans. Town's not what it was a year ago." As they walked toward the boarding house, Penelope's heart sank further. The town looked worn, dusty, and far less promising than Sarah had described in her letters. But there was no going back now. She had spent nearly everything getting here, believing her skills as a seamstress could provide for her and Lily. "Sarah mentioned there might be work," Penelope ventured, adjusting Lily on her hip. Griffin glanced at her, his expression guarded. "Your cousin. When did you last hear from her?" Something in his tone made Penelope's stomach tighten. 3 months ago. Why? Is something wrong?" They'd reached the boarding house, a 2-story wooden structure that had once been painted white. Griffin set down her trunk and removed his hat, revealing thick, sandy hair that curled slightly at his temples. "Miss Greene, I'm sorry to tell you this, but Sarah and her husband left Marfa 6 weeks ago. Railroad jobs dried up and many folks headed west to try their luck elsewhere." Penelope felt the ground shift beneath her. "But she told me to come. She said there would be opportunities here." "Things change fast out here," Griffin said gently. "But let's get you settled for tonight at least, and we can figure things out in the morning, Mrs. Wilson." A stern-faced widow with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue was reluctant until Griffin quietly mentioned something about settling a debt. She finally showed Penelope to a small room at the back of the house, the deputy carrying her trunk upstairs. "I'll come by tomorrow morning," Griffin promised, standing awkwardly in the doorway. "Town might be struggling, but we take care of our own, and until you decide what's next, you're one of us now." After he left, Penelope sank onto the narrow bed, finally allowing tears to fall as she nursed Lily. The baby, exhausted from the journey, soon fell asleep, leaving Penelope alone with her thoughts and fears. She had less than $20 to her name, no family, and no prospects in a dying town. As darkness fell, she wondered if she'd made the most terrible mistake of her life. That first night in Marfa proved to be the longest of Penelope's life. Lily, unsettled by the strange surroundings and the day's commotion, woke hourly with piercing wails that seemed to echo through the thin walls of the boarding house. By midnight, after Penelope had checked for fever, hunger, and discomfort, finding nothing obviously wrong, a sharp knock came at her door. "Miss Greene," Mrs. Wilson's voice was tight with annoyance. "The other boarders have complaints. Can you not quiet that child?" "I'm trying," Penelope called back, her voice cracking with exhaustion. "She's never been like this before." "Well, try harder. People here work for a living and they need their sleep." Penelope bit back a retort, instead pacing the small room, bouncing Lily gently and humming lullabies that fell on deaf ears. The baby's face was red with exertion, tiny fists clenched as she continued to cry. Around 2 in the morning, another knock came, softer this time. Penelope opened the door, expecting Mrs. Wilson's wrath, but instead found Griffin Jackson standing there in his shirt sleeves, suspenders hanging loose at his sides. "I was riding past," he explained, though Penelope wondered what deputy business had him out at such an hour. "Heard the little one all the way from the street. Thought maybe you could use some help." Penelope, too exhausted to maintain proper decorum, simply stepped aside to let him enter. "I've tried everything. She's not hungry, not wet, not feverish. She just won't stop crying." Griffin regarded the screaming infant with a thoughtful expression. "May I?" he asked, holding out his arms. Hesitantly, Penelope transferred her precious bundle to this virtual stranger. To her amazement, Griffin held Lily with practiced ease, supporting her head perfectly as he began to walk a slow circle around the room. "My sister had 4 little ones," he explained, seeing Penelope's surprise. "I helped with each of them when her husband was working the cattle drives." His voice dropped to a low, gentle rumble as he spoke directly to Lily. "Now, what's all this fuss about, little lady? You're giving your mama a mighty hard time on her first night in Marfa." Lily's cries didn't stop immediately, but they did soften as Griffin began a slow, swaying motion, almost like a dance. He hummed something that sounded like a cattle lullaby, his large hand patting a rhythm on Lily's back. "The first night in a new place is always the hardest," Griffin said softly to Penelope. "For little ones and grown folks alike. When I first came to Texas from Kentucky, I couldn't sleep for a week. Too quiet, if you can believe that. Missed the sound of rain on leaves." Penelope sank into the room's only chair. "I don't know what I'm going to do," she confessed, watching this stranger comfort her child. "I sold everything to come here, thinking Sarah would help me get established." Griffin continued his slow, rhythmic movement with Lily. "What can you do?" "Besides being a mother, I mean. I'm a seamstress. I worked for one of Philadelphia's finest dressmakers before I married. After William died of the fever last year, I went back, but..." She swallowed hard. "They wouldn't let me bring Lily," said her crying disturbed the customers. Griffin nodded thoughtfully. "We don't have fancy dressmakers in Marfa, but folks always need mending. And the ranches around here, the hands wear through their clothes something fierce. Mrs. Dawson at the general store might know of work." Lily's cries had diminished to whimpers, her tiny body gradually relaxing against Griffin's shoulder. The deputy sat carefully on the edge of the bed, still rocking slightly. "Why are you helping me?" Penelope asked suddenly. "You don't know me." Griffin's expression was serious in the dim lamplight. "Out here, we have to look out for each other. It's not like the cities back east where you can be surrounded by people but still be alone. Here, your neighbor's trouble is your trouble." He paused. "And I know what it's like to be desperate, with a little one depending on you." Before she could ask what he meant, Lily gave a final hiccuping sob and fell into an exhausted sleep. Griffin stood slowly and transferred the baby to Penelope's arms. "She might sleep a while now," he said, moving toward the door. "I'll come back in the morning, take you to meet Mrs. Dawson. Rest while you can." "Thank you," Penelope whispered, suddenly overwhelmed by his kindness. Griffin paused at the door. "Sometimes the best things come from the hardest beginnings, Miss Greene. Marfa might surprise you yet." After he left, Penelope laid Lily in the small trunk she'd converted to a makeshift cradle. As she watched her daughter's peaceful face, she wondered about the deputy with the gentle hands and kind eyes, and what hard beginnings he might have endured. The next morning arrived too quickly. Penelope had managed a few hours of fitful sleep before Lily woke again, hungry and fussy. By the time they were both dressed and ready to face the day, the Texas sun was already high and hot. True to his word, Griffin appeared at the boarding house after breakfast, looking more official in his deputy's attire, the silver star pinned to his vest catching the sunlight. "Mrs. Wilson giving you a hard time?" he asked as they walked toward the general store, noting the dark circles under Penelope's eyes. "She said we can stay 3 more nights, but after that." Penelope adjusted her bonnet against the harsh sun. I got the impression she was only agreeing to that much because of you. Griffin's mouth tightened. Her husband owed my father a favor before they both passed. I don't like calling it in, but sometimes necessity dictates. The general store was the largest building on Marfa's main street, its porch offering welcome shade from the unrelenting heat. Inside, shelves lined the walls stocked with everything from coffee beans to fabric bolts, tools to tinned foods. Mrs. Dawson, a plump woman with kind eyes and a practical manner, listened intently as Griffin explained Penelope's situation. "A seamstress, you say?" She eyed Penelope appraisingly. "Can't say we have need for fancy dresses here, but good sturdy work. That's different. Show me your hands, girl." Penelope extended her hands, calloused from years of needlework. Mrs. Dawson examined them, then nodded approvingly. "Strong hands, not too delicate. That's good." She glanced at Lily, who was chewing contentedly on her fist in Penelope's arms. "But the baby complicates things." "I can work with her nearby," Penelope insisted. "She's usually much better behaved than last night." Mrs. Dawson seemed unconvinced. "I have some mending that's piled up. Cowboys don't care much for holes in their clothes until they can see more skin than fabric. I could pay you for piecework, but not enough to board you and the little one." Penelope's heart sank, but she forced a smile. "Any work would be appreciated, Mrs. Dawson." As they left the store with a bundle of mending, Griffin looked troubled. "It's not much," he admitted. "It's something," Penelope countered, trying to sound more optimistic than she felt. "And I'm grateful." They walked in silence past the saloon, where men were already gathered despite the early hour. Penelope noticed how people nodded respectfully to Griffin, some with genuine warmth, others with cautious deference. "There's another possibility," Griffin said suddenly, stopping in the shade of an oak tree, "but it's not ideal." "At this point, Deputy Jackson, I'm open to any possibility that keeps a roof over my daughter's head." Griffin shifted uncomfortably, his hand moving to the back of his neck. "I have a place outside town, nothing fancy, just a small house on a few acres. My father built it years ago, thinking to start a proper ranch, but it never quite happened." He paused. "There's a little cabin near the main house. Used to be for hired help, but it's been empty for years. It needs work, but it's solid. You could stay there, do your mending, maybe even take in laundry." Penelope stared at him. "You're offering your home to strangers. As I said, it's not ideal. You'd be isolated, it's 3 miles from town, and people might talk." He met her eyes directly. "But it would be a roof, and I'd charge no rent until you get on your feet. Just help with keeping the place in order. I'm gone most days with my deputy work, and some nights too." "Why would you do this?" Penelope asked, suspicion creeping into her voice despite his evident kindness. Griffin's eyes took on a distant look. 5 years ago, my sister and her husband were killed when their wagon overturned crossing the Picos. Their youngest, my niece Emma, came to live with me. She was just 3. His voice softened. "She died last winter, influenza. Since then, the place has been," he shrugged, "empty." The raw pain in his voice touched something in Penelope. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "It would be good to hear a child's laughter there again," Griffin said simply. "And you need a place. Seems straightforward enough to me." Penelope knew it was anything but straightforward. A single woman living on a man's property would cause talk, no matter how innocent the arrangement. But as Lily began to fuss again in the heat, reality pressed upon her. Her options were dwindling rapidly. "May I see this cabin before deciding?" Griffin nodded. "I'll borrow the livery wagon and take you out this afternoon. If you hate it, no obligation. You can come right back to town." That afternoon, as they traveled the dusty road out of Marfa, Penelope began to understand what Griffin had meant by isolation. The landscape opened into vast expanses of scrubland, dotted with mesquite and occasional stands of oak near dry creek beds. The enormity of the Texas sky was both beautiful and terrifying to someone accustomed to Philadelphia's crowded streets. Griffin's property appeared suddenly, a modest white painted house set back from the road, surrounded by a few struggling oak trees. The main house wasn't large, but it was well maintained, with a wide porch and shuttered windows. A short distance away stood the cabin he'd mentioned, smaller but similarly constructed, with a single room visible through the open door. "It's not much," Griffin said as he helped her down from the wagon, but it's clean. No critters inside. I checked last week. There's a pump for water between the houses, outhouse around back. Wood stove works fine. Penelope stood in the cabin's doorway, taking in the sparse furnishings: a narrow bed, a small table with 2 chairs, a chest for storage, and the iron stove in the corner. It was humble but infinitely better than nowhere at all. It's perfect, she said quietly. Griffin looked relieved. We can fetch your things now, get you settled before dark. As they drove back toward town, Lily asleep in her mother's arms, Penelope gazed at the endless landscape. I've never seen such space, she admitted. It's beautiful but daunting, Griffin finished for her. You get used to it, start to feel closed in when there's too many buildings, too many people. Is that why you stay, for the space? Griffin considered this. Partly. I came with my father and sister after the war. Father served with the Union, wasn't welcome back in Kentucky afterward. He thought Texas would give us a fresh start. His hands tightened on the reins, and it did in its way. Now it's home. By sunset, Penelope and Lily were installed in the cabin, her trunk unpacked, the mending from Mrs. Dawson arranged on the table. Griffin had provided basic supplies: coffee, flour, beans, salt pork, and enough lamp oil to last a week. He'd shown her how to work the stove, where to find firewood, and promised to bring milk from town in the morning. I'll leave you be now, he said, standing awkwardly at the cabin door as the first stars appeared. If you need anything, just come to the main house. Thank you, Penelope said, meaning it more than she could express. For everything. After he left, she fed Lily, bathed her using water warmed on the stove, and sang softly as she rocked her to sleep. For the first time since arriving in Marfa, Penelope felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't the life she'd planned, but perhaps it could become something worthwhile. That hope wavered in the dark hours past midnight when Lily woke screaming, her cries seeming even louder in the silent vastness of the Texas night. Penelope tried everything: nursing, walking, singing, rocking, but nothing calmed her daughter's distress. Please, sweetheart, she begged, exhaustion making her voice crack. Please sleep. A knock at the door startled her. Opening it, she found Griffin standing there in his nightclothes, a robe hastily thrown over them. Heard her all the way in the main house, he said, his voice rough with sleep. Thought I'd see if you needed help again. Too tired to be embarrassed about her own disheveled appearance, Penelope welcomed him in. I don't know what's wrong with her, she said, tears threatening. She's never been like this before. Griffin took Lily from her arms, the transfer now feeling almost natural. Sometimes little ones get unsettled by change, he said, beginning the same swaying motion that had worked the previous night. New sounds, new smells. Takes time. Penelope watched as he paced the small cabin, speaking to Lily in low, soothing tones. His gentleness with the baby stirred something in her, a warmth she hadn't felt since William died. Sit down before you fall down, Griffin told her. You look dead on your feet. She sank onto the edge of the bed, watching them. How did you learn to be so good with babies? A smile touched his lips. Told you, 4 nephews and a niece, and my sister was always busy, so I helped. His eyes grew distant. Emma was the last. Her mama died birthing her, so she was mine from the start. Really? You raised her yourself, even as a deputy. Griffin nodded, still swaying with Lily. Made it work. Sheriff, that's old Frank Reeves. He was understanding about the hours. Community helped too before. He didn't finish the thought. Before they died, Penelope supplied gently. Emma loved it here, Griffin said after a moment. Used to say the stars were closer in Texas, like you could reach up and grab one if you tried hard enough. His voice caught. She was a special girl. As he spoke, Lily's cries gradually subsided, her small body relaxing against his shoulder. Penelope watched, mesmerized by this contradiction of a man tough deputy by day, gentle caretaker by night. You should sleep while she's quiet, Griffin suggested. Penelope nodded, suddenly unable to keep her eyes open. What about you? I'll stay until she's properly settled. Don't worry about me. She wanted to protest it wasn't proper, him being there while she slept, but exhaustion won out. Penelope stretched out on the bed, not even bothering to remove her robe. The last thing she remembered was Griffin settling into one of the chairs, Lily peaceful against his chest, his low humming filling the cabin like a protective spell. When she woke, Sunlight was streaming through the cabin windows. Lily was asleep in her makeshift cradle, and Griffin was gone. A note on the table read simply, "Milk in the pail outside, back at sundown, GJ." The next few days established a pattern. Penelope worked on the mending during the day, learning to navigate her new surroundings. Griffin would leave early for his deputy duties but return in the evening to check on them, often bringing supplies or news from town. And each night, like clockwork, Lily would wake crying in the darkest hours. Each night, Griffin would appear at their door, having heard her from the main house. And each night, he would rock Lily until she settled, sometimes staying until dawn, the three of them forming an unlikely tableau in the small cabin. On the fourth night, Penelope found herself watching Griffin with Lily, wondering at the strange intimacy that had developed between them. It wasn't romantic, nothing had been said or done to suggest such feelings, but there was an undeniable connection forming, built on shared exhaustion and mutual need. "Why does she come for you and not for me?" Penelope asked, genuinely curious. Griffin considered this, his large hand patting Lily's back rhythmically. "Sometimes a different touch helps. My mother used to say babies can sense worry. Maybe she feels your concern and it troubles her. And she doesn't sense yours." A smile touched his lips. "I've got nothing to worry about when I'm holding her, just living in that moment." The simplicity of his answer struck Penelope deeply. She had been so consumed with fear for their future that perhaps she hadn't been fully present with her daughter. "Tell me about your life before," Griffin said suddenly. "In Philadelphia." Surprised by his interest, Penelope found herself describing her childhood in a merchant family, her apprenticeship with a dressmaker, her brief marriage to William Greene, a bookkeeper she'd known since childhood. "We had barely a year together before the fever took him," she said softly. "Lily was born 3 months after he died." Griffin nodded, understanding in his eyes. "The hardest kind of beginning." "What about you?" she asked. "Before Texas?" He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. "War came when I was 16, he finally said. "My father and brother joined the Union Army. I stayed to help mother with the farm and my sister." His jaw tightened. "Brother never came home. Mother died while father was away. By the time he returned, there wasn't much left for us in Kentucky." Penelope found herself wanting to touch him, to offer comfort for these old wounds. Instead, she asked, "Do you ever regret coming here?" Griffin looked down at Lily, now sleeping peacefully against him. "How can I regret the path that led me here? Even with all the loss, there's been good too." His eyes met Penelope's. "Like now." The simple statement hung in the air between them, charged with meaning neither was ready to acknowledge. The next day, Griffin didn't return at sundown. As darkness fell, Penelope found herself watching the road anxiously, wondering where he might be. She told herself it was merely concern for someone who had shown her kindness, but the knot in her stomach suggested otherwise. When Lily began her nightly crying, Penelope forced herself to handle it alone, determined not to depend too much on Griffin's help. She paced the cabin, trying all the techniques she'd seen him use: the swaying, the back patting, the low humming. Nothing worked. Hours passed. Lily's cries grew hoarse but didn't cease. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the cabin's shutters. Penelope, desperate with exhaustion, finally bundled Lily in a blanket and made her way to the main house. Perhaps there was something there that would help: a rocking chair, a different blanket, anything. The front door was unlocked, as Griffin had told her it would be in case of emergency. She hesitated only briefly before entering, immediately struck by the contrast to her sparse cabin. The main house was modest but comfortable, with worn but quality furniture, bookshelves lined with volumes, and walls adorned with a few simple paintings. It felt lived in, cared for. Penelope found the rocking chair in what must have been Emma's room, a small space with a child's bed still made up with a patchwork quilt, a shelf of toys and books, undisturbed. The sight brought tears to her eyes, imagining Griffin maintaining this room like a shrine to his lost niece. She took the rocker into the main room and sat, adjusting Lily against her shoulder as she began to rock. Whether it was the change of scenery or the smooth motion of the well-made chair, Lily's cries finally began to subside. Penelope hadn't meant to fall asleep, but the rhythmic rocking and the release of finally quieting Lily lulled her into exhaustion. She woke to the sound of the front door opening, momentarily disoriented. Griffin stood in the doorway, his clothes dusty, his face etched with fatigue. He seemed unsurprised to find them there. "I'm sorry," Penelope began, embarrassed at being found in his home. She wouldn't stop crying, and I thought maybe it's all right, he interrupted, removing his hat. "I'm glad you felt you could come here. Where were you?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Too personal, too presumptuous. Griffin sank into a chair across from her, wincing slightly. "Trouble at the Carson Ranch, cattle rustlers. We tracked them into the hills but lost them after dark." He ran a hand through his hair, leaving it standing on end. "Didn't mean to worry you." "I wasn't worried," she lied, then relented at his knowing look. "Perhaps a little." A small smile touched his lips. "Lily sleeping through now?" Penelope nodded, looking down at her daughter's peaceful face. "Finally, this chair worked magic." "It was my sister's," Griffin said quietly. "She used it for all her children." He hesitated. "You should take it to the cabin, might help on the hard nights." The generosity of the offer moved her. "I couldn't, please," he said simply. "It should be used, not sitting here gathering dust." Something in his expression made her heart ache, the loneliness he carried, the grief he kept contained but never truly absent. Without thinking, Penelope reached across the space between them and took his hand. "Thank you," she said softly. "Not just for the chair, for everything." Griffin's fingers tightened around hers briefly before he pulled away, standing abruptly. "You should get some sleep. I'll carry the chair over in the morning." The moment had passed, but something had shifted between them. As Penelope made her way back to the cabin with Lily, she felt a strange mixture of confusion and clarity. Griffin Jackson was becoming important to her in ways she hadn't anticipated, and the realization was both thrilling and terrifying. Over the next 2 weeks, life settled into a new rhythm. Penelope completed the mending for Mrs. Dawson and began taking in laundry from some of the town's more prosperous citizens, building a modest income. Griffin helped her set up a clothesline between the cabin and the main house, and on wash days, the sight of linens flapping in the Texas breeze gave the property a feeling of life and purpose it had long lacked. Lily, too, began to adapt. Her nightly crying became less frequent and less intense. When it did happen, Penelope would rock her in the sister's chair, sometimes singing softly, sometimes just holding her close in the darkness. Occasionally, Griffin would still come to help on the worst nights, but those moments of shared caregiving became the exception rather than the rule. Instead, their connection grew in daylight hours. Griffin would often take his meals with them when he wasn't on duty, bringing game he'd hunted or vegetables from a small garden behind the main house. They would sit at Penelope's small table, talking about their days, sharing stories from their pasts, carefully avoiding mention of the growing affection between them. One evening in late August, as they sat on the cabin's small porch watching the sunset paint the landscape in golds and reds, Griffin turned to her with unusual seriousness. "The sheriff's planning to retire after Christmas," he said, his eyes on the distant horizon. "He's offered me his position." Penelope looked at him in surprise. "Griffin, that's wonderful. You deserve it." A small smile touched his lips at her use of his first name, a recent development that neither had acknowledged. "It would mean more responsibility, but also more stability, better pay. You'll accept, won't you?" He was quiet for a moment. "I'm thinking on it. There are considerations." "What considerations?" she asked, sensing something unspoken in his hesitation. Griffin looked down at his hands, then back at the sunset. "A sheriff should be a settled man, someone the town respects." "In most places, that means a family man." He cleared his throat. "Frank Sheriff Reeves, he mentioned that directly." Penelope felt her cheeks warm as she understood his meaning. "Oh, Penelope," Griffin began, then faltered, uncharacteristically unsure of his words. "These past weeks, having you and Lily here, it's changed things for me," her heart quickened. "It's changed things for us too," encouraged, he continued. "I know it's fast. I know you came here looking for one life and found something entirely different, but I care for you deeply. And Lily." His voice softened. "I love that child as if she were my own." "Griffin," Penelope started, but he held up a hand. "Let me finish before I lose my nerve." He took a deep breath. I'm not proposing marriage, not yet. That would be too soon, and you deserve better than a hasty decision born of convenience. His eyes, sincere and earnest, met hers. But I am asking if you might consider staying, permanently, building something here together at whatever pace feels right. Tears pricked at Penelope's eyes. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything now, Griffin assured her. Just think about it, about us. Before she could respond, Lily's cries came from inside the cabin where she'd been napping. Griffin stood, offering Penelope his hand to help her up. The simple touch his calloused palm against hers felt like a promise. I'll think about it, she said softly. That night, after putting Lily down, Penelope stood at the cabin's small window, looking toward the main house where a lamp still burned in Griffin's window. So much had changed in such a short time. She'd arrived in Marfa desperate and alone, and now found herself contemplating a future with a man she'd known barely a month. Yet in that month, she'd seen Griffin's character revealed in countless small ways: his gentleness with Lily, his fairness as deputy, his quiet grief for his lost family, his unwavering support as she built her small business. In Philadelphia, courtships lasted years with formal visits and chaperoned outings. Here in Texas, life moved at a different pace. People made decisions quickly because tomorrow was never guaranteed. Did she love him? Penelope wasn't entirely sure. But she felt something growing between them that could become love, perhaps already was love in its early stages. And she knew with certainty that he was a good man, the kind who would protect and provide for her and Lily, who would treat them with kindness and respect. Was that enough to build a life on? Her practical nature said yes. Her heart, still cautious after loss, hesitated. As if on cue, Lily began to cry. Penelope sighed, preparing for another long night of rocking and soothing. But tonight was different. Lily's cries were more intense, her tiny body hot to the touch, her breathing rapid and labored. Fear clutched at Penelope's heart. This wasn't normal fussiness. Lily was truly ill. Without hesitation, she wrapped the baby in a blanket and hurried to the main house, knocking urgently on the door. Griffin answered immediately, taking in the situation at a glance. What's wrong? She's burning with fever, Penelope said, her voice shaking. I don't know what to do. Griffin touched Lily's forehead, his expression growing concerned. We need to cool her down. Come inside. He moved with decisive efficiency, filling a basin with cool water, finding clean cloths, instructing Penelope to remove Lily's gown. Together they bathed the baby's overheated body with cool cloths, Griffin's large hands impossibly gentle as he helped Penelope turn the crying infant. The doctor's away until tomorrow, Griffin said grimly. Visiting the outlying ranches, but my mother used to make a tea for fever's willow bark. I have some. While he prepared the tea, diluting it heavily for the infant, Penelope continued bathing Lily, murmuring prayers and reassurances. When Griffin returned with the tea, they worked together to coax tiny amounts into Lily's mouth between her cries. It's going to be a long night, Griffin warned, his eyes meeting Penelope's over Lily's feverish form. But we'll get through it together, and they did. Hour after hour, they tended to Lily, refreshing the cool cloths as they warmed, administering more tea when possible, taking turns holding and rocking her when she grew too uncomfortable to lie still. Through it all, Griffin remained steady, his presence a rock that Penelope clung to in her fear. As the night stretched toward dawn, Lily's fever finally began to break. Her cries, which had been constant, gradually subsided to whimpers, then to the occasional hiccuping sob. By the time the first light of day touched the eastern horizon, she had fallen into an exhausted sleep against Griffin's chest. Penelope, herself beyond exhaustion, looked at the two of them, this strong man cradling her child with such tender care, and knew her decision was already made. Yes, she said simply. Griffin looked at her questioningly, his eyes heavy with fatigue but still alert. Yes, I'll stay, Penelope clarified. Yes to building something together. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by a happiness that transformed his tired face. You're sure? You're not just saying this because of tonight, she shook her head. Tonight only confirmed what I already knew. You're a good man, Griffin Jackson, the kind of man I want in Lily's life, in my life. She reached out to touch his cheek, the gesture new but feeling somehow familiar. I don't know if what I feel is love yet, but I know it could be. I know I want it to be. Griffin captured her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm, their first intimate touch. That's enough for now, he said softly. The rest will come with time. As the Texas sun rose fully, bathing the room in golden light, Lily stirred against Griffin's chest, her eyes opening clear and free of fever. She looked up at him, then at her mother, and did something she had never done before. She smiled, a real, intentional smile that lit up her tiny face. Penelope laughed through sudden tears. Look at that, her first real smile. Griffin's eyes shone with emotion. Smart girl, he said hoarsely. She knows a family when she sees one. 3 months later, on a crisp December morning, Penelope Greene became Penelope Jackson in a simple ceremony at Marfa's small church. Lily, now crawling and babbling, wore a dress Penelope had made from one of Sarah's old gowns, sent by her cousin who had written with delight upon hearing of Penelope's new life. Sheriff Reeves, proudly retired, stood as Griffin's best man. Mrs. Dawson, who had become a friend and staunch supporter of Penelope's growing sewing business, held Lily during the exchange of vows. That night, in the main house that was now their shared home, as Lily slept peacefully in what had once been Emma's room, Penelope and Griffin stood by the window, looking out at the vast Texas landscape that had brought them together. Did you ever imagine this? Penelope asked, leaning into her husband's embrace. When you pulled me behind that water trough my first day in Marfa, Griffin chuckled, the sound rumbling against her back. Can't say that I did. Though I remember thinking you were the most determined-looking woman I'd ever seen, holding that baby so tight while bullets were flying. I was terrified, she admitted. Not just of the shooting, but of everything being alone, starting over, failing Lily. And now. Griffin's arms tightened around her. Penelope turned in his embrace to face him. Now I'm not alone, and neither are you. She reached up to touch his face, tracing the lines that hard living and grief had etched there. We found each other in the emptiness. From the next room came the sound of Lily stirring, not crying but making the soft noises that preceded waking. Griffin smiled, dropping a kiss on Penelope's forehead before moving toward their daughter's room. Let me, he said. I like rocking her in the morning. Penelope watched as he went, this man who had once been a stranger and was now the center of her world. In the early dawn light of a new day, she offered silent thanks for all that had brought them to this moment, even the nights of endless crying that had first drawn Griffin to their door. Outside, the Texas sky lightened to pearl, then gold, promising another day of possibilities on the frontier they would face together.